In legacy admission to university news, lawsuits are using the recent Supreme Court decision relating to affirmative action to go after legacy admissions. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the term legacy admissions, this means admitting someone to a college who is a descendant, child, grandchild of someone who previously went to your school. So if you were part of the family line, you get preferential treatment. And that preferential treatment, by the way, can be quite powerful. I believe Harvard has something like a 90% admission rate when it comes to legacy admissions, which is obviously much higher than their normal admission rate by quite an order of magnitude. So yeah, being a legacy is a pretty good deal because you tend to get admitted a lot more easily. Well, who used to go to colleges in the past? Well, in the past, there was less people of color. So who tends to get preferential treatment? People who are descendants of those people who got admitted in the first place. So this works as a racial barrier as well. So the lawsuit basically being like, hey, schools, if you're really serious about the racism, how about getting rid of legacy admissions? Now, the schools really, really like legacy admissions because it tends to mean that the families are giving them money and they like money. Yay, money. The family is giving them money. They build a new wing at a library or something. And it's like, we just so happen to admit your kid. They're totally qualified. It has nothing to do with your donation. Wink, wink, wink. And it's like, well, if it has nothing to do with the donation, if there's nothing in common, then how about getting rid of the admissions? And they're like, we can't do that. So anyways, we're going to try to go after the legacy admissions now. Let's give that a try. Let's learn a little bit more about this. Harvard's practice of giving a leg up to children of wealthy donors and alumni must end. And then this little poster says, 43% of white students at Harvard are legacy athletes, children of donors, or members of or children of faculty. This preferential treatment. So you can see what a big deal it is, right? Harvard's admission rate is really, really low. But if you are a legacy admission, if you're an athlete, if you're a child of a donor, if you're a child of a faculty member, your odds of getting admitted are about 90%. So when you look at Harvard as an overall demographic, about half the admins are in this protected category. Well, geez, I wonder who's getting to be part of this protected category, right? What is the racial demographics of this protected category? Probably looks a little bit different than the racial demographics of the rest of the school. Hey, how serious are you about ending racism? How about getting rid of the legacy admissions? I love it. I love it. The Boston nonprofit Lawyer for Civil Rights filed a lawsuit on behalf of multiple Black and Latina community groups on Monday, alleging that legacy admissions also violate Title VI, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race by any institution that accepts public funds. The parties being represented in the lawsuit, the CHICA Project, the African Community Economic Development of New England, and Greater Boston Latino Network, have requested the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights open the investigation into disparate impact of Harvard's use of donor and legacy admissions. Yeah, disparate impact. Those are words I understand, right? It's like this policy, which is facially racially neutral. This policy, which is facially racially neutral, like there's nothing on the face of it that is race biased, as opposed to let's consider race, which we were just doing 5 seconds ago, which is obviously considering race on its face. This is race neutral. Let's admit the athletes. Let's admit the children of faculty. Let's admit the legacy admins, right? It's facially neutral. But in reality, not so much. Disparate impact, often a way of looking at these laws. So these are words I understand. So they have called for the officials to declare the admissions a violation of Title VI in order Harvard to end the practice. I feel like there's no way on this earth that the Democratic administration will declare an end to legacy admissions, or any of these institutions will. There's just way, way too much money in it. And they like money more than they hate the racism. It seems quite apparent. Why are we rewarding children for privileges and advantages that accrued by prior generations? That's a reasonable question. Your family's last name and the size of your bank account should not be a measure of merit and should have no bearing on college admissions. I understand these concepts, right? If we talked about this the other way around, like your parents were really bad or your grandparents were really bad, we have a name for that in law. It's called corruption of blood. And you'll actually see that in legal language, right? What is corruption of blood? Well, as the name sort of implies, because you're a blood descendant, you take on the corruption of your parent. Because your parent was guilty, because your grandparent was guilty, you are guilty. The corruption of the blood flows through the family line. This also very popular policy brought to you by North Korea, for example. You know, if your parents sinned against the state, your grandparents sinned against the state, you are also guilty. Illegal in United States law for very obvious reasons. You know, just because my father, if the case were, which he's not, by the way, just for the record, but if my father were a murderer or a spy or whatever, right? His sins are his own, right? I have the right to not be judged by my father's misdeeds. That seems very fair, right? My father is an independent person. My grandfather's an independent person. I shouldn't be judged for his wrongs. Well, perhaps the reverse of that's also true. Just because my father was a great person, or just because my father was rich, or just because my father was whatever, shouldn't necessarily read on to me. So maybe corruption of blood should also apply the other way around. Makes logical sense. The complaint draws on data that came to light amid the affirmative action case. So, as one would expect during the discovery process, as it relates to the Supreme Court case, that discovery process churned up a lot of information as it relates to lawsuits. And now that information might be able to be used for a different purpose. For example, these lawsuits. It's like we can't help notice during discovery, there was a lot of information that we suspected to be true when it came to these legacy emissions. But now that we've seen all these wonderful internal documents and reports, we can confirm and prove it to be true. So yeah, that was exciting. So this is going to help us in this lawsuit. There's no birthright to Harvard. As the Supreme Court has recently noted, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. I love it. I love it so very much. You know, yeah, bring it down. Bring it all down, man. Half the school is these legacy emissions. Maybe if you didn't do that, you could admit more people of color if that's what you want to do. But you don't really want to do that. You just want to complain about the problem. There should be no way to identify who your parents are in the college application process. Not unreasonable, right? My parents were really, really bad, shouldn't be held against me. My parents are really, really good and rich, shouldn't be held for me. In a statement about the lawsuit, they contend that the Supreme Court's ruling makes it even more imperative to eliminate these policies that systematically disadvantage students of color. I love it, right? It is systematic. It is literally systematic. It is built into the system. So if you are looking for systematic discrimination, which I hear a lot about from the left, we need to get rid of systematic discrimination. Okay, here's an example of systematic discrimination, right? Because it's literally systematic. It is literally in the system, right? We are telling you, we are privileging students who fall into this category. It is part of our system. It is part of the process of our system. It is literally systematic. So if we're really interested in getting rid of the systematic discrimination, this looks like a pretty good way to go about it. So are we really serious or not? I love it so very much. The records uncovered during the affirmative action case show that donor-related applicants to Harvard were 7 times more likely to be admitted. Yep. And that the legacy candidates were 6 times more likely. Yep. That's a lot. Harvard's practice of giving a leg up to children of the wealthy donors who have done nothing to deserve it must end, says the litigation. This preferential treatment overwhelmingly goes to white applicants and harms efforts of diversity. About 28% of Harvard's class of 2019 were legacy. 30% is legacy. 30%. And then once you add in the athletes and the children of the professors and the other preferred children, you bring that number up to about 50%. Yeah. Only 57% of white students who were admitted on merit. On merit. So 43% of white students who are there because their daddy was special. All right. 43% of white students are there because their daddy is special. So if we didn't look at them because their daddy was special, then we wouldn't have admitted them. So how serious are we about ending racism, Harvard? Quality and highly deserving applicants of color are harmed as a result, as admission slots are given overwhelmingly to the white applicants. Seems that way. In recent years, numerous colleges and universities, including all higher education in Colorado, the University of Colorado, California, Johns Hopkins, and Amherst, have abandoned the practice of prioritizing donor-related and legacy admissions after finding the progress to be fair. So some places, including some states, have already made the decision to get rid of this because they couldn't help noticing that it was showing preference and harming people who should be there on actual merit. Hey, here's a fun idea. What if we admitted people to the university based on merit? That would be good, right? What if the people who went to university are there because they deserve to be there? Because the university fundamentally is a university. This is Aristotle, right? This is basically Aristotle virtue ethics 101, right? Who should we give the best violins to? Who should we give the best violins to? We should give it to the best violin players. Why should we give the best violins to the best violin players? Because that's what the best violins are for, right? That's virtue ethics, Aristotle 101. So the universities, who should we give the best universities to? We should give it to the best students. Why should we give the best universities to the best students? Because that's what universities are for. It is part of their fundamental function. It is what they are designed to be. So let them be what they're designed to be. Let the students who be there, who are there because they are students for the university, and it is its fundamental function. Deep concepts. Aristotle said this like 3,000 years ago, and we're apparently relearning it for some reason. If a federal probe into the civil rights implications of donor and legacy admissions comes down our way, we'll see not just a change at Harvard, but other institutions. I think that there's basically zero chance. I'm going to put a bet down. There's basically zero chance the Biden administration is really going to do anything about this. They might do something like, facially. It's like they might even say we're doing something. They're not really doing something. They'll probably send it somewhere into some dark hole of the Department of Education, never to be heard from ever again, assuming they do anything at all. But maybe it's like, oh yeah, we're right on it. We got top men working on it. Who? Top men. As we put it into a sealed cask into a warehouse somewhere and never look at it ever again. But yeah, I seriously doubt, because there's just way too much money in it. But maybe the courts can do something about it as we shove their own principles right up their own backsides. How fun. Thus, that brings us to the end of the case that is just beginning as it relates to these wonderful legacy and other preferential admits. As this wonderful graphic right here shows, 43% of white students at Harvard are legacy athletic, children of donors, children of professors, or other preferential people, which is basically their parents gave us money. And most of the students are not there because of merit. Some states, such as Colorado, and some schools, such as the University of California, have already made this process illegal. Let's let the best people go to the best universities, because that's what universities are for, at least for the moment. That brings us to the end of discussion of this case.